Hello, everybody, and welcome to How I Learned to Love Fantasy. I'm Travis Oates.
And I'm Dan Billet.
And this podcast is all about talking about the things from our childhood or our pasts, even sometimes our near pasts, that shaped our love of fantasy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You agree with that?
I agree with that.
Wholeheartedly.
Wholeheartedly.
And in some cases that we're passing on to our children,
Yes.
as this particular subject today is one of those cases, at least.
Yeah, it's certainly timely.
I get to a certain extent, although I reject that movie on its face.
Well, okay.
The subject matter today is a book,
Yes.
a series of books,
Yeah.
and we talked about it, I think, briefly the last time we talked about books,
Right.
and that is The Wizard of Oz.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for a lot of people out there, you know The Wizard of Oz either from the movie from 1939 or from movies like Wicked.
Yeah, sure.
That use the backdrop, if not the creative spark that created Wizard of Oz. I'm not a big Wicked fan.
Use the world and subvert it and change it.
Sure. And don't know that it was a series of 14 books by the original author.
Mm-hmm.
That was expanded to 40 books after his death that are considered canon. Although I'm not a big fan of the books that followed after his death. I think that the tone was shifted a little bit, and the quality went down.
So I should say,
Sure.
This was my experience of The Wizard of Oz as a kid was the movie. Like, I never read the books. I only read the books recently, or the first book recently, because we were talking about it, and we're going to be talking about it today. But the movie was a huge part of my life, as for lots of people around our age, because it was out of copyright. And so it was able to play on TV all the time. And it was one of the first movies that I think ever played on TV in its entirety. And so you would get to see it major holidays, stuff like that. They would play Wizard of Oz. And so that's my experience of the.
And ironically, because you chose to read the first book, which makes sense,
right?
You really know
very little,
because the first book, and we're going to talk about this, is almost an anomaly on the series.
Right.
The first book, tonally and constructively, is completely different than everything else he does afterward.
All right.
And we'll go into
I
maybe why that
learning.
was.
Yeah. This is fun.
Yeah. But yes, I think most children know of the Wizard of Oz, but they probably don't know the way that it was in book form.
And so popular, like when it was the Harry Potter of its time.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
It was, in fact, by statistical standards, it was even bigger than Harry Potter was.
Wow.
The
Travis, nothing is bigger than.
I know.
Like it's a statistical impossibility. So.
Anyway. When you compare the number of books sold to the number of people who were buying books at that time, it was a monster hit. In fact, so it came out, the first book, which was The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, which so let's, and I actually think we missed the splash page when I mentioned The Wizard of Oz, but there's the splash page for The Wizard of Oz. So we're gonna pass through the splash page though and go to The Wonderful Wizard of Oz.
Right.
So that was the very first book, and when it came out, it was the best-selling book for 2 years, not just the year it came out, but for 2 years, which was kind of unheard of in those days.
Sure.
That a single book remained at top of the charts for that long. And huge hit, and kind of changed the trajectory of L. Frank Baum. L. Frank Baum is an interesting fella. He was an incredibly poor businessman for his entire life.
Okay.
I feel a bit of a kindred. There's a kindred spirit. Hopefully, I'll have a success like that someday, and not just all the failures he had. But he had a number of failed attempts at businesses.
Sure.
He was given a printing press, an amateur printing press by his father
Okay.
when he was young, and so he and his brother, like, made pamphlets and all kinds of things that they would sell. He was an avid stamp collector, and
Okay.
so he made these pamphlets about, stamp collecting and
It's so weird that he wasn't a bigger success with
and,
his stamp collecting
and he
pamphlets.
was a reporter.
Sure.
Later, he was a newspaper man, especially when he lived in Chicago, and he owned a store for called Something Bizarre. It was like, and uh, that went bankrupt because he kept letting people buy stuff on credit
Mhm.
because he was a soft touch,
Right.
and when they wouldn't pay back, he couldn't pay the bills,
Right.
and then he turned to writing children's fare. And the first major thing that he did is he took the Mother Goose rhymes
Sure.
and he turned those rhymes into full on stories and published a book that was those stories, and it did moderately well. And so he thought to himself, okay, maybe kids literature is the way to go. So he sat down and he wrote The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. Do you know where the term Oz came from?
Is it ounce?
No.
No.
No, he was trying to come up with a name. He wanted a very short, concise name for
Okay.
this fantasy land that he was coming up with. And right by his desk, he had a small filing cabinet that was A to N, O to
O
Z.
to Z.
And so he looked down there and he like, Oz.
Right.
That sounds neat. And that's where that came from.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, it's
There was the way that Wizard of Oz came back to me, like when I was a little bit older, was as a political allegory, and one of the and
sure,
which I think was kind of laid on top of it later, but after the success of the plays and because all the plays that it spawned and the other media that it spawned, but there was like in the 70s, or 60s or 70s, somebody came out with a theory that it was all about
sure.
progressivism in America at the time, and you follow the yellow brick road was the gold standard and things like that.
Right, the politics of the time,
Right.
and it was especially the gold and silver debate that was happening.
Because
turn of the century.
Dorothy's shoes were silver
Sure.
in the books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Silver slippers.
Yes.
I believe. No, ruby slippers, silver shoes.
Right.
There's silver
Ruby
shoes
slippers
in the book.
in the movie.
And
Yeah.
ruby slippers in the
Yeah.
movie. And you know why it was ruby slippers in the movie? Because
Why?
originally they did try silver shoes.
Right. Why?
Because in color it looked black and white.
It didn't pop.
And
Right.
they wanted that change from black and white to color to be so.
Right.
Yeah, so that's why they changed it to ruby slippers. Yeah, it's. I don't know if any of that's true. Look,
Yeah.
L. Frank Baum was a complex person of his time. He did have political leanings. He was a strong supporter of the suffrage movement.
Right.
He very, very women's rights. In fact, so he wrote quite a few novels outside of The Wizard of Oz for children. It was very prolific. None of them had any level of success close to the Wizard of Oz books, and that's I think why he kept coming back to them over and over again. But he had some interesting issues with Native Americans. He wrote a couple, and this it's an interesting thing. I have Native American heritage.
Because we were talking about the time that he wrote.
Sure. But there's a debate. So he wrote two blistering articles, newspaper articles about the Native American, because this was during the period of time also where there was a lot of homesteading.
Westward expansion.
Yeah, westward expansion.
So we're talking about the
Late 1800s, yeah.
Okay.
1890s
Okay.
in particular.
Yep.
But he had also written a bunch of things sympathetic to the Native causes too.
Mhm.
And a lot of people think that the two articles that he wrote where he just went after, like, we should kill all the Native population, were written as sarcastically, that were written like,
parody
because they were right
of that
after,
kind of
each one was right after a very famous, one was after Sitting Bull was killed, and the one was I think the other one was after the Battle of Bull Run.
hmm,
And both were after massacres.
right.
And so people think that he was writing these things like, yeah, yeah, we should just kill all of them, just like we just did, saying like feeding into that bloodthirstiness, trying to go over the top to make people react in horror of that.
Right.
So there's a big debate because it seems very apocryphal for everything that he had done up to that time. In the entire body of his work, there's nothing like that.
Right.
So I think so there's a debate going on whether that was really how he felt or he was trying to make people angry over that viewpoint to make a point.
That's
So
interesting. Okay.
yeah, it's and nobody really knows. But it other than that, he was kind of on the side of the angels for most
topics.
looking back, especially like I said with women's rights and with the rights of people who did not have rights during that period of time. He was very harsh on that. He was also, I don't want to say socialist in nature, but he was very much we should take care of everybody and everybody should be treated equally and that kind of thing.
But he was a reporter, and he did do a
Absolutely.
lot of like he like when they did the plays on Broadway, they would put in little political jokes and things like that.
Well-
that you know,
Not from him.
not from him.
No, in fact, he hated that.
Oh, okay,
The plays were largely written without his involvement,
okay,
at least the ones that he did not write. Many of them he didn't write. There were a couple that he did write that didn't have any of that stuff in it.
okay.
The one that did the best that ran on Broadway for a while, which, by the way, resembles nothing close to the movie and nothing close to the story.
Okay.
Like Toto is replaced by a cow. There are two other characters. One's a waitress and one is like a bus driver or something like that.
Interesting.
Are also taken by the cyclone.
Okay.
Like there's no Wicked Witch in the play. No, in fact, it's a very, very weird, by today's standards especially, we would look at that and go, wow, that's like, there's a lot of weird stuff in
Right,
there.
sure.
And he was, by the way, like a terrible playwright. Like
Okay.
if you look at the plays, because he, especially in his later life, his biggest desire was to make films. So he wanted to make movies.
Okay.
And he made a couple. In fact, you can go on YouTube, I believe, and find, if you look up The Patchwork Girl of Oz, you can find the movie he made of that book.
Oh.
And it's unwatchable, even by silent movie standards. It was a silent movie.
Right.
It's not good. It's
Right.
very bad.
Okay.
And a lot of his plays were pretty bad that he wrote.
Right.
And did not do well at all. He only really had one play that went to Broadway.
Okay.
That was a takeoff of and it was shortened to The Wizard of Oz from The Wonderful Wizard of Oz.
Gotcha.
And in fact, in later years, Wonderful was dropped off. In fact, I have all the books physically here.
Right.
So this is the copy that I had, the first copy I ever had of this. These are usually my original copies
Wow.
from when I was a kid. And you notice it's called The Wizard of Oz.
Right.
So they did drop Wonderful even, and these were in this, I think these were, I want to say early to late 70s, all these Del Rey books were, and they have the most amazing art on each one of these books.
Yeah.
So I collected all the Del Rey books. But yeah, so just that one play, all the others did incredibly poorly.
Gotcha.
And none of the other ones made it to Broadway. There was one that he had here in Los Angeles that did pretty well. That was like, I want to say the TikTok of Oz or something like that.
So
It did okay, but it didn't make it.
can you expand the world for me because what I know is The Wizard of Oz, and which I'm going to assume that most people have at least a passing familiarity with, like
Sure.
the movie The Wizard of Oz, which is a great movie. Like watching it again for this, like it is like it's beautifully shot. There's a lot of really cool stuff.
Yeah, and the music is fantastic.
Music is wonderful.
Music is like
yeah.
amazing
Yeah.
in that film. And we could do an entire episode just on the film, The Wizard
Right.
of Oz.
Sure. And maybe we will.
Maybe we will someday.
Yeah. But this is about the books. So
Yeah.
this is really about the sort of and of course there is the other film of Return to Oz, which
Yeah, we won't. I don't know.
we're not
Talk
going to
about
talk about that.
that. Yeah, I mean that would make an interesting episode just to deconstruct and everything that went wrong in the making. There's a lot of good things and a lot of
Yeah.
bad things
It was
in that
indelible,
movie.
like the trauma
Yeah.
of that
And
caused
that
to lots of kids.
and that movie, by the way, was a mixture of the next two books.
Right.
So, The Land of Oz and Ozma. In fact, here got them here, so I might as well show.
All right.
So the Land of Oz, which is the one that came after. This is actually a newer copy of that because the Land of Oz was in such bad shape that it was missing a cover. So I
Okay.
brought this one instead. And Ozma of Oz. So it was these two books that became Return to Oz,
Right,
that
okay.
movie, as they took bits and pieces for each. And the visuals of that movie,
Oh yeah.
and this is the last that we'll say of that,
Okay.
because I want to go down that rabbit hole.
Right.
But the visuals of that movie were spot on. They were exactly the description and the illustrations from the books. So that they did amazingly
It was
well.
Walter Murch, I think, right? Who?
I'm not sure.
Yeah. Anyway,
I'm not sure.
but yeah, it was that for. I was like 10, 8 or 10 when
Yeah.
that came out, and it was both very upsetting and like really full on. It's a full on movie.
Yeah.
It's-
Well,
it's-
they tried to give Dorothy electroshock treatment.
Yeah.
It's a very strange.
Yeah.
Which is not in any of the books. To go through the books.
Sure.
So we start with The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, which is still up there. And it was, like I said, this was a one-off for Baum at the time. This was the first time he was really like creating his own world. And so I don't think he thought it through as like, I'm going to make this entire franchise. And so he just wrote it the way he wrote it. And it's an incredibly violent book. It's not an incredibly violent movie, but it's an incredibly violent book. There are all kinds of deaths in it.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a sequence when the Wicked Witch is sending her minions to stop them from getting to her. That she sends out 100 ravens,
Mhm.
and the Scarecrow breaks the neck
Yeah.
of 100 ravens,
Yeah.
and then she sends 100 wolves, and the Tin Woodman
Man
chops off the head of 100 wolves.
Yeah.
And it's only when she sends the flying monkeys that the flying monkeys defeat them.
Right.
Oh, and bees. That was the other thing. She sent a swarm of bees, and the Tin Woodman let them sting him and all die.
Right.
So she was just killing things off left and right in the books. In the first book, he was quite full of death,
Right.
and he kills off both the Wicked Witch of the West and the East in the book. And
She meets both the North and the South witch in the book.
yes,
like
they're in the movie. It's the same witch, but it's
right.
in the books. It's
the two. It's
yeah.
the other two.
Glenda is not the witch she meets in the beginning.
Right.
She actually the witch she meets in the beginning is kind of a portly, motherly
Right.
woman, and Glenda, who depicted very much like she is in the movie.
Yeah.
Who is the most powerful force of magic in Oz and remains so in the books.
Right.
But yes, so it's an interesting to read just the first book. It would give you a very different idea of what
Sure.
the book series became. So when that became such a huge hit, he sat down and went, okay, millions of kids are reading this. How do I want to depict a world for children? And he actually sat down and thought about it and said, okay, well, first of all, he started making some rules. And the first and biggest rule was in Oz, no one ever grows old and no one ever dies. So from that point on, there's not a single death that appears in any of the books.
Okay.
Which is strange because, if again, coming from the first book and then being told in the second book, oh, nobody ever grows old and nobody
Right.
dies. What happened with the whole first book was, two of the main witches die in that.
Right.
book.
Yeah.
No, that's from there on. He states that's the way it works.
Okay.
That there was a spell cast over the land of Oz, which froze everyone at their current age.
Gotcha.
And that no one could die from then on. But that spell, by the way, has been there for quite some time, certainly past the first book's like time period. So
Right.
it wasn't like right after the first
Right, right,
book
right,
that
right.
happened, which is why Dorothy remains the exact same age for the rest of the series, even
Okay.
though time passes on. When Dorothy, as long as she's in the land of Oz, she doesn't grow any older.
Now, but she in the second book? Because
So she is not in the second book.
yeah,
So the
because
second book was the Land of Oz,
right, and that's
and the Land of Oz is the main character's name is Tip,
Tip, right. I
and
read that.
he creates Jack Pumpkinhead. He is the assistant to a wizard who creates the powder of life, and so he is able to actually. All right, let me remember that. No, he is an assistant to Mombi, who is a witch.
Okay.
In fact, kind of a slave of sorts to Mombi. Um, and the Crooked Man is the one that creates this powder of life, and Mombi has bought the powder of life, and he steals the powder of life, creates Jack Pumpkinhead, makes a sawhorse, a real kind of horse of sorts, and runs away, basically. And there's a big twist at the end, which is very progressive by today's standards that I will not mention because I don't want to wreck it.
Okay.
But yes, he makes his way to the Emerald City. And by the end of that book, Ozma, the Princess of Oz, is introduced, and she is the ruler of Oz from that book forward. So from every book forward, Ozma of Oz is the ruler of Oz.
Okay. So the ruler, and that's because the Tin Man and the Scarecrow and the Lion, they all were the kings of their uh, domains at the end of the first book,
Kind of.
like the king of Emerald City.
Kind of.
Right. Okay.
Yes. So the Scarecrow was the king of Oz. Yes, at the end
Right.
at the end of the first book. The Tin Woodman was Lord of the Winkies.
Right. And the Lion was the king of the forest.
King of the forest.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know how much that actually.
Uh,
I don't know if the forest like is technically a kingdom, but
I
yeah.
don't know. It seemed very much like it was
Yeah,
in reading the book.
Sure. Then in the next one, in Ozma of Oz, we do go back to Dorothy.
Gotcha.
And Dorothy is on a ship with her uncle. By the way, her poor aunt and uncle, like because they think she dies numerous times throughout. I mean, the actual wear and tear that would happen on these poor people, because she's on a ship traveling to Australia with her uncle. Because her uncle is ill, I think, and the Australian air is supposed to do him good.
Ah, mate.
Yeah. And they're on a ship, and in the middle of a storm, she gets swept overboard.
Okay.
Along with a chicken coop.
Okay.
And the chicken coop is a floating, floats, and that introduces Bellina, who is a talking, that you will remember from Return to Oz,
Right.
a talking chicken.
Right.
And she does not actually, I don't believe Oz is ever in this book, because she goes to a neighboring kingdom and meets a delegation from Oz that has come into this neighboring kingdom.
Right.
Oz is surrounded by these the shifting sands, which are this desert that if you step on it, it turns you to sand.
Gotcha.
So they find a way to travel across the shifting sands to one of the neighboring. In fact, we'll get to this toward the end, because I don't know if we can. Can we just jump to a picture without doing it in order?
Of course we can. This is
you.
Brett in the booth, and
Brett in the
I'm completely able to do any of that.
Can you jump to the map?
The map? Of course I can. I will do that right now, he said.
Doing it
when he
right?
thought he could do it. Oh. Hey!
There you go. So you see it says Deadly Desert, Shifting Sands, Impassable Desert. Most of the time they just refer to it as the Shifting Sands, but he named each one. But there you see the Land of Oz on the bottom. That's the map of Oz. But then the upper map shows that there are a bunch of kingdoms around the Land of Oz past the desert. And some of those are from other fantasy books that he wrote, and became, some of those were where other novels in the Oz series took place. Rinkatink, I believe, if you can see all the way right over here. That an entire novel takes place there,
Right.
and I don't remember which kingdom Ozma of Oz takes place. Oh, Eve. So right, the
Gotcha.
green and blue land right here. This land here. That's where that one takes place.
Okay.
So yeah, we never set foot in Oz,
Right.
but all the. In fact, if you see on the cover, you'll see that a magical carpet
Right.
that's like that extends in front and then rolls up behind is
Yeah.
how they got across the shifting desert.
Cool.
And so you meet a lot more characters, and that's where Ozma and Dorothy actually meet and become best friends, and they're best friends like for the rest of
Okay.
the books. And you meet a couple other canon characters. You meet TikTok of Oz, and you meet the Hungry Tiger, which are big characters throughout the rest of the novels.
Right.
Yeah, and so
And how did you come to this? Like, as
I can tell you exactly how I came to it.
Right.
So my dad, who was an avid science fiction and fantasy reader, had a large collection
right.
of books. And he would go to the bookstore every week when new stuff would come out, new magazines and novels. And I asked to go with him one time. I can't remember how old I was, maybe around 7. And I went there, and he said that every time I come with him, that I can get one book,
Right.
and he'll buy it for me. And on the shelf was this book here, and this is the book. It was The Patchwork Girl of Oz, and
Okay.
I didn't know anything about Oz at that time. I don't even know if I'd seen the movie.
Okay.
Yep, Patchwork Girl of Oz, right
There we
there.
go.
And I picked this out. I think it's because it looks so beautiful.
Yeah.
I picked it out, and my dad bought it for me, and I just devoured it. And then for the next few weeks, I would go there and get another Oz book.
Right.
And I believe I couldn't wait 14 weeks. I believe I like scrambled other money of my own together, because I think these were the $2.50. That's the price of these.
Yeah, sure.
$2.50 at the time.
Yeah.
That one there says $1.95. But so I scrambled the
$2.50
money
Canadian.
together. $2.50 Canadian. Actually,
Right.
that's probably true.
I know, yeah.
That's probably true, because I
Yeah.
bought this in Canada. So I just got the money together, and I started getting the whole collection. And
Right.
I just went right through the collection. And I read all of the reason these books are so worn is I must have read all of these books like 10 times each at least.
Right.
In fact, I remember, because we had a boat. We had my dad's job took him to a lot of places in Upper Canada where we would need to go by boat. And I remember reading like an entire book in a day, like on the boat with, and I became an avid reader.
Do you think, because the world that, you look at the maps, and like Tolkien built these amazing worlds, and this seems like a pretty amazing world. Do you feel like
Oh,
it
yeah.
influenced because you love to build, like, world building is
Oh,
like,
for sure.
like what you're great at, and it's like you have invested a lot of time and energy into creating amazing worlds. And I wonder if
It was
much
the
you feel
first
like this-
time. So
this
if you open these
influenced you.
books, I gotta be careful here because these are fragile at this point. But if you open these books, each of these books has a map in here. Yeah. So to show you, each of these books has a map, the same map that you're looking at, but not in color. The maps we were looking at before. So it has a map in there.
Right.
That's the first time I'd ever seen that in a book that had
So
a
this
map.
was before your experience with Lord of the Rings.
Oh,
This is
yeah.
Right. Okay.
Wait. This is probably my first experience with a fantasy book of any kind.
Gotcha. Okay.
And it's a great beginner because it's pretty kid safe and kid friendly, to this day. Like I said, with the exception of the first book, which is a little violent, but other than that,
Right.
not so much. So for sure it was, and it's a large world, and it's like amazing. I don't know how much of it he plotted out ahead of time or how much just came to him. I know that he only intended there to be 6 books. So the next one, and again, to try and make the Dorothy's family worry even more, there was an earthquake, and Dorothy sucked down into the earth in an earthquake.
They didn't start happy. That like
No.
they
And
were
they got-
like the saddest people in the
Yeah.
world in the
Yeah.
first book,
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
yeah.
This is Dorothy, and then they brought back the Wizard of Oz.
Okay.
And he and Dorothy are at a fair earthquake happens and they're tumbled down to the center of the earth and have an entire adventure there that eventually brings them up at the very end to Oz. But
Oh.
again, Oz is barely in this book. Like the
Gotcha.
Land of Oz is barely in this book. So this one here, The Road to Oz. Again, this is where, yeah, no, that's great to have up. So in The Road to Oz, Dorothy starts talking with a homeless guy and the homeless guy and Dorothy disappear together.
Oh, that's
so
nice.
Again, yeah. It's the Shaggy Man.
Oh,
That's the name of him. And
what could possibly go wrong?
And he's a wonderful character.
Right.
Like he's a very sweet, but his parent, her aunt and uncle don't know that. So she just disappears with a homeless guy.
Right.
Yeah. So,
Did Dorothy age in the real world or
not much.
Not
And we're
much,
going to
okay.
get to why that is.
Okay.
So I think she probably aged a year or two,
Mhm.
but this is The Road to Oz was the last book where Dorothy doesn't live in Oz. So
Okay.
for the 6th book, which he had intended to be his last,
Right.
in fact, he made a big to-do about it being his last, which is the Emerald City of Oz. A couple big things happen. First of all, the Gnome King, which was defeated in the 3rd book,
Right.
decides to raise an army to take down the Emerald City. And so much of the book is him raising an army of some just hideous creatures that are going to take the city. And Dorothy and Ozma go, hey, maybe it's a bad idea for your aunt and uncle to keep thinking that, their precious daughter is being taken by natural disasters and homeless people.
Right.
Maybe you should tell them what's going on. And they do. And they bring them to the Emerald City. And because they're quite aged and at that point, and therefore they can't grow old and die.
Gotcha.
And they live, forever in the Emerald City with Dorothy.
Right.
And by the way, I should also mention there are a couple things that he did not like in children's literature and felt that children were not interested in them. And romance was one of them.
Okay.
He did not feel that children had any interest in romance. And he's probably true to a certain extent. My son certainly, he was 11, couldn't care less about romantic things in most stories and novels. And so there was never really a romance within the books. There was, they talked a little bit about the closest that comes to a romance in the book is between the Scarecrow and the Patchwork Girl, and the story of the Woodman, the Tin Woodman, is because he
was in love. Yeah.
But I mean, other than that, there's pretty much no romances. So I think like freezing Dorothy's age
Sure.
before she really hit puberty
Sure.
was kind of by design, because I don't think he ever wanted romance to really be a part of the Oz books.
Right. Okay.
And he wraps it all up. Dorothy now lives in Oz. Her aunt and uncle live in Oz. Oz is safe. Everything's great. And thank you very much. This has been a wonderful experience. Now, I should mention that he did something very unusual that we had never seen before in literature, in that he treated every one of these novels has a foreword by the author, where he talks directly to the children, and it's a note to them, because he got, thousands of letters from children, and that's part of what shaped, I think, why he changed things, because he got so many letters from kids and it just really impacted him, because he tried to read as many as he could.
Well, he says here that basically now he's just using the kids' ideas that they send to him, and he's
well, to a certain extent.
Yeah,
but if you read there, he also treats this like it's a real world.
Right. Oh yeah.
He is the royal historian of Oz,
Mhm.
and the way that he in these notes to the children, he says, Dorothy told me these stories. I am merely passing along to you the stories that have been told to me. I am not making any of this stuff up. This is like the real thing. And to protect Oz from the outside world at the very end of this novel,
Mhm.
she magically cuts Oz off from the rest of the world. And the reason he says in the book, I'm sorry, this is the last book, because there is no way for me to communicate with Dorothy anymore. So I'm sorry that, that's it.
Right.
That's the last book. And these forewords, by the way, are beautifully written
Right.
and
Yeah, no, it's lovely.
and really, really quite lovely. So so he went on to try and do other things, and then we have the Patchwork Girl of Oz.
Oh.
Now, I could, by the way, show more about this book, but I could instead show you one of my most prized possessions.
Uh-huh.
Right down here.
Uh-oh.
Falling over.
It used to be that television. While you're doing that, Travis, Brett in the booth here, I'd like to point out that the first book, after the first book, they decided to make the rest of them a half an inch bigger.
Yeah, and that
half an inch taller, just to throw things off a little bit. It was
just for OCD people.
Yeah.
To
if you see, they're all it's a different publisher. Also.
Oh,
Yeah, he had a falling out with his publisher. So this
whoa
is a first edition.
Wow.
First edition, first run copy of the Patchwork Girl of Oz.
That's amazing.
So
That's
I was in
beautiful.
a rare bookstore, and I mentioned that this is the first book that I ever the illustrations are still as beautiful today as they were when this came out in, I believe, 1910. I was in a rare bookstore, and I saw this book sitting up there, which again is the first fantasy book I ever read, to my knowledge.
Right.
And I was like, man, if that's a first, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
If that's a first, and it's the cover is covered in a plastic, and it's an anti-UV plastic too.
I just
So
want to show that's such a great.
yeah, isn't that beautiful?
Yeah.
And so I brought it up, and I said to the woman, is this because the price was severe.
Right.
And I said, is this a first edition? Because if it's a first edition, I'll get it. And I didn't have a lot of money back then. This was when I was kind of starting out my writing career.
Right.
And so she brings out this book, because there are these books that will tell you, is something. And then so here's one of the first things that was in the book was the chapter marker is off there. It's supposed to be over.
Oh, right.
Right. So I don't know if you can see that.
So that's how you know that it's a.
Well, there's a bunch.
Right.
So she was going through all these different things, and as everyone was being checked off,
the errata. I think that's what
they would go, okay, on page 91, this, there's an and instead of an or whatever. And as she's checking each one of these off, I'm like in goosebumps, because I'm like, oh my God, this could be not only a first edition, but a first run of the first edition.
Right.
So this is the first set of books that came off the press, and that's not a huge number of books,
right,
that are out there. And sure enough, this was a first run, first print of the first fantasy book that I ever owned.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So this is one of my most. This is when you ask like what would you grab during a fire, this is one of the things I would grab during a fire.
Right.
Is this one right here? But yeah.
That's very cool.
Yeah. I've never had the balls to like read it.
Oh.
Because I'm, I'm so afraid of like harming any part of it.
Huh.
It's in okay condition. It's one of the reasons why it didn't cost me thousands and thousands of dollars. To give you an idea though how expensive this was, right now they're selling a full set of first edition, mostly first run. I think 12 of the 14 books are first run, for $80,000.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah. So you can get an idea of probably how much that was.
Gotcha.
So yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. Isn't that cool?
Yeah, it's very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I do want to read though a little bit of because I think it's hilarious, the little foreword that he has here. Because he had just told everybody, no, there was no way.
Right. So and this is the first book after that.
Yes. So this is the first book after this. And this is, I'm going to read one of two forewords. I'm going to have you read a foreword as well.
Okay.
Later on here. Let's see, where would I start here? So it goes on for a while to say, it's terrible. I know that I said that, I couldn't do this, and humble writer in the United States of America, was once appointed Royal Historian of Oz with the privilege of writing the chronicle of that wonderful fairyland. But after making 6 books about the adventure of those interesting but queer people who live in the land of Oz, the historian learned with sorrow that by an edict of the supreme ruler, Ozma of Oz, that her country would thereafter be rendered invisible to all who lived outside its borders, and that all communication with Oz would be in the future cut off. It says the children who had learned to look for the books about Oz and who had loved the stories about the gay and happy people inhabiting that favored country, different time,
Yeah.
were as sorry as their historian that there would be no more books of Oz stories. They wrote many letters asking if the historian did not know of some adventurers to write about that had happened before the land of Oz was shut out from the rest of the world, but he did not know of any. Finally, one of the children, and this is a true story,
Okay.
inquired why we couldn't hear from the Princess Dorothy by wireless telegraph, which would enable her to communicate to the historian whatever happened in the far-off land of Oz without his seeing her or even knowing just where Oz is. That seemed like a good idea. So the historian rigged up a high tower in his backyard and took lessons in wireless telegraphy until he understood it, and then began to call Princess Dorothy of Oz by sending messages into the air. And he goes on to say that that was successful. And so that because one little girl said, hey, there's this new invention, which is wireless telegraph. Have you tried that? And so he used that as, and then he wrote 14,
8 more books?
8 more books
Yeah.
as a result of that.
Oh, that's
but I
cool.
just loved that, like, it was almost an interactive process.
Right.
And I won't go through every single one of them, but the book series went on. We had that one. We had TikTok of Oz, which is what he tried to make a play out of,
Okay.
with varying levels of success. And this one was, I won't go through the storyline of every single one of these. Then we have the one that I can't find, which is the last one I read to my son, which is The Scarecrow of Oz, which was also his favorite book. So
Whose favorite?
L. Frank Baum's
That was his favorite
of
one
the
that he
series.
wrote?
That was his favorite.
Okay.
And of course, I can't find that one.
Okay.
Which we looked everywhere for yesterday.
Well, it's up there on the.
Yeah. And then we had Rink Tink Tink in Oz.
Okay.
Rink-a-Tink in Oz,
Tank?
which wasn't actually in Oz at all, and is not about. It is about a young Prince Inga, who is aided by King Rink-a-Tink. That again never does bring the Gnome King back. The Gnome King was kind of like the go-to villain of this series.
Not in the first book, but in
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have actually a connection to the Wizard of Oz that I've never told you about.
Oh yeah. What's
Yeah. I worked in for a while for a company that was building an amusement park in Kansas of the Wizard of Oz.
Oh really?
Yeah, and it was in the design phase. They spent millions and millions of dollars. They had all. You would get there by going into a house.
Did it look like this?
Like which?
Bring up the one in North Carolina, because that's an actual theme park in North Carolina.
So this one in North Carolina is different. The one that they were building, it was Landmark Entertainment. They were building one in Kansas, where it was a huge hundreds of millions of dollars, and you would get into a house, and the house would be taken up by a twister, and you would end up in Oz, and then you could cross back over a rainbow bridge, and all kinds of stuff. And the Gnome King was a huge part of that.
Yeah.
And then there was a change of administration in Kansas, and they cut all the public funding for it, and it just completely disappeared. But it was amazing, like being able to see all the artwork that they did and all the all the plans that the roller coasters and everything like that were really just incredible. And I worked for them for several months. Yeah.
I wrote a movie.
Did you?
Called To Oz. I don't know if you ever read it.
No, I haven't.
It was bought by United Artists.
Okay.
When it was owned by Paula Wagner and Tom Cruise.
Tom Cruise, yeah.
And I think I have told you about that meeting with Tom Cruise, and that was.
Do you want to tell everybody?
No.
Okay.
I won't go too far into it. It was a very exciting. I don't want to get too, because again, that's a whole rabbit hole of its own. But I did sell the film, and unfortunately, it didn't get made because MGM, who owned United Artists, they went into bankruptcy.
Right.
So there was a bunch of stuff that happened during that period of time. I'm also, if you want to go again on YouTube and look up a a movie called Galaxy of Oz,
Oh.
which is a Japanese anime film by Inoki Films.
Okay.
You can watch that on YouTube. I voice like half the characters in that
Oh, right.
film. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so there you go. Galaxy of Oz. It's the story of the Wizard of Oz, but in like the Tin Woodman is basically C-3PO and
Right.
like,
okay.
yeah.
Right.
yeah, it's like every third character is me on that. It's just so funny.
That's fun.
So then Lost Prince after Scarecrow was Lost Princess of Oz, which I remember liking quite a bit.
Right.
And then we had the Tin Woodman of Oz. Again, these illustrations were just amazing in these Del Rey
Yeah,
books.
it's beautiful.
The Magic of Oz. By the way, in the books, the Wizard of Oz, after the fourth book, goes and he lives in Oz, and he becomes a real wizard. So he becomes an actual, not a
fake-
humbug
not-
wizard,
not
but
a
but a
humbug
but a
faker.
real wizard.
Yeah, that the wizard scene in the book is I mean the multiple wizard scenes in the book because it's not just once with the big head. He appears as a woman. He appears as like a creature, that was fascinating because that was very different from the movie. That was
very much so.
for each of the different main characters.
A ball of fire.
Ball of fire. That's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So then Glinda of Oz, which was the very last book that he wrote.
Okay.
And like I said, he has a foreword for each one.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to have you read this foreword because I can't read it because I will cry.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
But I think this is beautiful.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, no pressure on this cold read.
Exactly.
of your,
Exactly. Hopefully you can read.
Yeah. To our readers, Glinda the Good, lovely sorceress of the land of Oz and friend of Princess Ozma and Dorothy, has lots of personal acquaintances who want to know more about her. So, in the new Oz story, Mr. L. Frank Baum, royal historian of Oz, has written a whole book about how Glinda and the wizard worked with all their might to save the princess and Dorothy from the dire dangers which threatened them when they went among the warring tribes of the Flatheads and the Skeezers. The wicked Queen Coo-ee-oh, a vain and evil witch, was really to blame for all the trouble. She surely succeeded in getting everyone on the magic glass-domed island of the Skeezers into amazing difficulties. When Mr. Baum tells you how worried everyone in the land of Oz felt about the Princess Ozma and Dorothy and what wonderful sorcery Glinda had to perform to save them, you will be thrilled with excitement and admiration. He reveals the most hidden mysteries of magic.
All normal up to this point.
All what?
All normal
Okay.
up to this point.
Mr. Baum did his best to answer all the letters from his small Earth friends before he had to leave them, but he couldn't answer quite all, for there were very many. In May 1919, he went away to take his stories to the little child souls who had lived here too long ago to read the Oz stories for themselves. We are sorry he could not stay here, and we are sad to tell you that this is his last complete story. But he left some unfinished notes about the Princess Ozma and Dorothy and the Oz people, and we promise that someday we will put them all together like a picture puzzle and give you more stories of the wonderful land of Oz.
I'm weeping.
Yeah.
It kills me every time I read that because they're telling all the kids
That he died.
he passed on.
Yeah.
No, he's telling stories to kids who passed on.
Right.
Killed me when I was a kid.
Right.
Killed me when I was a kid. Kills me as an adult. It's one of those things. I, by the way, weep very easily. For those of you who are worried that I'm having a crisis of some kind.
No, but this is this is I think that when
Never seen that in a book before,
right.
where they kind of go, because he had personalized every one of these.
Right.
And that's the only one that wasn't written by him.
Right.
But yeah.
But it's a kind of gift that they gave to the kids to not, I don't know, to be able to talk about death in a way that is understandable and actually hopeful and a happy thing for them that these other kids get to hear the stories. But and in many ways that's kind of what happens, right? Like when an author dies, the kids that are not yet born get to read the stories.
Live on,
yeah.
And he died rather suddenly. It wasn't from like a long illness or anything. He had a stroke,
Right.
and passed on fairly young by today's standards. He was in his 60s.
Right. Right.
Yeah. I should have brought tissue.
Yeah. I don't know if we have.
I do have a first edition that I could use, but I think
Yeah. No, don't do that. No, that's
Yeah.
beautiful. That's really lovely. Yeah.
So there you go. That's that in a nutshell is the Wizard of Oz.
Well, I know you wanted very much to talk about this
Yeah,
because it was
yeah.
so indelible for you.
Oh, yeah,
and the world that I actually would like to go and read some more of them now. Like knowing that it's a very different experience. I think that's
Yeah, it's a like I s it was one of the first films I wrote when I moved here, so the story of To Oz, which is
Mhm.
the name of the screenplay, was that Dorothy has a heart attack. So Dorothy is at some point has decided that she is had left Oz at some point,
okay.
and she was in modern day Kansas,
Okay.
and she has a daughter and 2 grandchildren. And so when the grandchildren are visiting, Dorothy has a heart attack, and she goes to the hospital, and her 2 grandchildren stumble upon a hidden part in the house and discover all these things that indicate that she is the actual Dorothy from the
From the
Oz
right.
books.
Okay.
And her grandson is like an avid reader of the Oz books, so he recognizes all these things.
Right.
And they use the silver shoes, which can transport you anywhere you want to go,
Right.
to go to Oz to get the denizens of Oz to come back with them to modern day Kansas to break Dorothy out of the hospital and take her back to Oz so that she can't die.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
So
cool.
that's what the movie is about.
right.
But that was like one of the first things I wrote when I came here to Los Angeles,
Right.
and started my jaunt as a screenwriter.
Right.
So yeah, and one of my first big sales.
Right.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, it's amazing that you got to like carry on the love that you had for the stories.
Yeah,
and,
yeah, and made money off of it. It bought my house.
Right. There you go.
Literally.
Yeah. Not bad.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you
Yeah.
for sharing.
Sure.
this thing that you love about
Yeah.
science fiction fantasy.
Yeah. I highly, those of you who have kids and are looking to gently move them into the realm of fantasy, this is a great place to start. There are some things that are antiquated, but not so much so that it's not problematic in the way that some pieces are. It has very little politics or they never mention religion. They never mention politics. They never mention any of the problems of the day. Like
Right.
it's all self-contained. The language in the book, the one thing I will say is, anybody who reads books from the turn of the century, one of the reasons I had my son reading these when he was younger is they're not much like the same thing with the Harry Potter books. They're not dumbed down. The language is incredibly complex language.
Right. Okay.
And it's great for them to learn a bunch of different words, if they're past the point where they're, the 1 fish, 2 fish, red fish, blue fish stage.
Right.
And you want them to expand their vocabulary. These books are great for that.
Oh, cool.
And if you have kids, like I said, that aren't quite ready for Harry Potter, because Harry Potter also, there's a lot of dark subjects in Harry Potter.
Sure.
And by the way, you might even skip the first one, The Wizard of Oz. You don't really need it.
Right.
And it is the only one that has any real violence of any kind in it. After that, everything is pretty, there are threats, but
Right.
nothing ever bad really happens to anybody. There are threats that something bad might, but it never really, not a whole lot of sorrow.
Right.
And especially, the Harry Potter book starts out dark, but it gets much dark.
Yeah.
After about the third novel is about the last one, I think you can safely share with like a 7, 8, 9-year-old before that has fear issues, because a lot of people start dying after that point in the Harry Potter.
Well, the first book is an easier read because it's half an inch shorter.
Yeah. No,
So,
and it's true, but it
yeah.
does start out with like Harry's parents dying and stuff.
Yeah. No.
So I mean, it's just I don't think we ever find out why she's living with her aunt and uncle, because obviously her parents have passed on too, but I don't think that is ever
right. Talked about. In the
talked
books.
about.
Right.
Also, for those of you with female children, little girls, most most of the heroes in the Oz books are girls.
Right.
They're girls about the age. I don't know how old she is in the first book. I think maybe she's 7 or 8, and I think she ends up being about 10 or 11 by the time she moves to Oz.
Right. Okay.
So again, in Ozma, heroes, a lot of female heroes. In fact, one of the things about his books is the mostly female protagonists, and they were usually doing the kind of things that men would be depicted doing in those days.
Right.
They were the heroes. So yeah.
Very cool.
So that would be my recommendation.
All right.
I think after about 14 years old, probably they probably might age out of these books, especially these days. But
Right.
hard to say. Depends on the child.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us on for how we learn to love fantasy.
Yeah. Join us, please. Ring that bell.
Yeah.
Comment. Tell. I know in the comments a lot of you love this new series, but very few people are watching it. So if you know people who like this kind of thing, please pass on to them that this exists, because we'd love to keep doing more of them.
Yeah, we'd love to have more people, share with us the things that they loved about fantasy.
Yeah,
the things
yeah.
that
And also
brought them in
the comments, give us subjects that you would like us to cover.
Yeah, there's been some we actually have to talk about, because there've been some really great suggestions even so far.
Yeah.
So we'll get back to it.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, and we will see you in 2 more weeks.
Yeah.
I believe every twice a month.
All right.
This particular. All right. Thank you so much, and
Bye-bye.
thanks for joining us.